Thank you, Alex. And, I'll plug all of your relevant show notes or I guess notes on Alex and your firm and everywhere where folks can get plugged and connected with you. But the first thing that caught my eye in doing my homework on your LinkedIn was the question that's at the top of your bio. And I want to make sure I don't miss it here, but it's, how much do I need to retire comfortably? It's a question that, I'm in my 20s. I speak with a lot of my coworkers. I think the, good and bad over the shift in the workforce over the last, call it, decade or so, is people are a lot more comfortable talking about saving and planning and retirement and
That's right.
comp. And it's just, I think part of that's, the rise of things like Glassdoor and these hiring websites where you can get a pretty good proxy for how much you should be making in a role or how much your colleagues or peers in a similar role might be making. But because of that, it's top of mind and people talk about it all the time. We just had our 401k rollover discussion today at my company. So I'd love to tee up that question for you because it's a question that's relevant to me and a lot of the kind of listeners in my target demographic here as well. So how much do I need to retire, Alex?
Well, sure. It's a great question. It's in some sense, it's an easy question, but sometimes it can be rather complex. I'll give you three answers, if you don't mind. I mean, I'll give you three different answers and see which one you like the most. So for those who are, let's say, earlier in their career, let's say in their 20s or 30s, I would say it's an absolute must to save anywhere between 10 to 20% of your gross income to be on target for comfortable retirement. And this is actually based on a Fidelity study. It's probably 3 to 4 years old at this point, but I don't think it's dramatically changed over the past number of years. So again, for those of your listeners who are in this age category, 10 to 20% of their gross income. Now, for those who are in their perhaps 40s or 50s, so mid-career professionals, let's put it that way. Usually at that time, if you really want to be on track, you need to have some kind of number in mind. And that's what you do by, running projections, looking at someone's lifestyle, looking at someone's budget, which is what most people really dislike doing. But again, there are multiple options. So that's when you want to make sure that perhaps if you start saving earlier in your career, perhaps you can keep it at 10 to 20%, which would be ideal. Or for many people who are actually very successful, it's just that they didn't get that opportunity to save early on. That leads to be a large number or larger number, I should say. And then finally, the third answer to that question for those in their late 50s and early 60s, that's mostly the focus of my practice, we usually tailor it specifically to their needs. And here it's like the answer can essentially be anything. I have clients who have significant portfolios, but they're not ready for retirement. Why? Because of their lifestyle choices. At the same time, I have clients who have relatively modest portfolios. They have their Social Security, they have their pension. They can retire anytime, essentially, because again of their modest, in this case, lifestyle. So again, later in life, it becomes much more specific. So that's my long answer to your short question.
It's the beautiful professional services answer of it depends.
Well, in some sense, but it truly does depend on someone's preferences. Again, that's why, those generalizations, I'm sure you've heard of the rules of thumb, 60 to 70% of your expenses. I really dislike them. I very rarely use them even in introductory meetings because it's like, really, someone who is retiring with, $500,000. I mean, it really depends on specific circumstances.
Now, one other maybe spicier personal finance realm question, and I want to learn more about your background and story. But again, along the vein of so much out on the internet from a comp perspective and, employee payroll perspective that people are conscious of now that they weren't aware of, years ago. There's also a plethora of personal finance information that's just getting thrown at us on social media today. And it's all over LinkedIn. It's all over Instagram. I'm sure it's over TikTok as well. There's tons of these personal finance gurus out there really over the last couple of years have really blown up with, different insurance schemes and different anything under the sun. There's also a lot of really good collateral out there material. And again, for folks, none of this is financial advice from my perspective, at least, but for folks that are going to come to CSF down the road. But today, if you're going and scrolling on social media, is there a particular person in the finance industry that you think is consistently putting out good content, whether it's the Dave Ramsey's of the world or Amit Sethi's? Is there someone that you think, hey, like this person is consistently giving decent advice? Anyone that you would, advise someone to follow and stay along close to?
Well, so that's actually a great question. So my personal favorite is Michael Kitces. He
Okay.
is the native of Reston, Virginia. Actually, I don't think he's in Virginia anymore. Maybe wrong. He is one of those, very popular commentators at this point. So he is great. He puts out different types of material. Some of it is relatively basic for, public consumption. Let's put it that way, and it's good general advice. Let's put it that way. A lot of his comments, a lot of his materials, I should say, are for professionals like myself. So when you start digging really deep, so that's good. I do like Dave Ramsey. I do not follow his structured approach, but I believe it's a good choice for people who, let me be gentle here, who are not willing to spend the time. They just want to follow someone's, baby steps, which is what he calls them. In terms of the big picture, one of the books that really changed my opinion on finance, purely from the big picture perspective, is Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's, believe it or not, and I have a feeling you'll believe me, I read that book and I reread it 5 times easily. And every time there was a nugget of information, I was like, wow, this is so easy and so deep at the same time. It's not going to teach you necessarily personal finance, but it's going to help you with your financial slash life decisions. So, the whole concept of the rat race, I feel like it was described best in his book. So,
Yeah, it's a time and time again a winner, and it's come up on this show in the past. Now, I want to dive into the Alex backstory here. For anyone just on audio, Alex has a cool 3-piece map behind him. Where are you from originally? Where are your parents from? How'd you get to where you are today from a origin and background story? I want to learn more about your tennis journey and dive into a bunch of it, but maybe get me up to speed from day one till going to ODU. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what in your upbringing gave you the context to where you are today.
well, that's such a great question. I really appreciate it actually. So I'm originally from the Kyrgyz Republic or Kyrgyzstan. So this country is in Central Asia. It's close to China. That's probably the best way to describe it. A different way of describing it, if you look at the world map and you drill a hole where we are at this point, essentially here in Virginia or Maryland, and you come out on the other side. So that's essentially where I'm from. I mean, that I mean it almost literally when I looked at the map. So in terms of my background, it's say rather interesting if I say so myself. So my original goal was to become a professional tennis player. So I dedicated, my teenage years to playing tennis. I mean, we're talking 3, 4, 5 hours a day, if not more. I traveled around the world. So earlier in my life, I guess I traveled quite a bit, which I believe gave me a certain, perspective. So I used to be 86 in the world in juniors, and that's how I ended up at Old Dominion. I was recruited to play at Old Dominion in Norfolk, Virginia. It's great, 4 years. I very much enjoyed it, and I played some professional tournaments and some higher quality tournaments. And long story short, I decided that perhaps that would not be the best career choice for me. And at the time, I was offered an assistantship to do my graduate studies also at Old Dominion. At the time, I also worked at Merrill Lynch, so that was my first place where I worked for less than a year. It was successful in a way that I realized that working at Merrill Lynch is not for me. So there was that. So at the same time, I was in grad school. I worked at Wilbank Smith and Thomas. It's a great firm, and I still stay in touch with many of them. I think of them as my mentors. In fact, in Norfolk, Virginia, again, great people. They're a $3 billion firm at this point. There were other engagements, so that's eventually I ended up in the DC area, and I worked for a firm that specialized in financial planning, divorce, very little investment work, and that's when we launched my first firm as the four of us originally. That's another long story, but the original owners decided to sell the firm, so that's how I ended up as part of a larger CPA firm, which is also very interesting for someone in my line of work. I do a lot of tax planning. I'm not a CPA, but I'm very comfortable with that because I spent, almost 10 years at this point dealing with that. So then I realized, I've done quite a bit of soul searching and decided to launch my firm. Now, one of the reasons I decided to do it, one of the reasons this is personal to me, which is a little bit of a sad story, I guess, but my father passed away at the age of 70. So
Hmm.
we came out on a beautiful morning. It was November 25th of 2020. Played some tennis. Then I came home. Long story short, two police officers knocked on my door. Had a heart attack at the age of 70. Perfect health, it appeared to be, But so that changed my mind on the whole retirement idea. One of the reasons I wanted to launch a firm that specializes in retirement planning, because people save, every dollar, we're going to invest it. We're going to have a great life to age 95. When in practice, things like that do happen. It's just that usually people tend to focus on the positives and not so much on things of that nature. So what makes me also different from that perspective, I'm one of the financial/retirement planners who encourages people to spend more. It's uncommon. Usually it's about, again, saving and saving. We develop a plan, of course, we run different scenarios, but my ultimate goal is to make sure that my clients actually enjoy their lifestyle and they're not just, accumulating more and more when it's really unnecessary.
Hmm.
So that's my story.
There's a lot I want to learn more about there. Starting with your journey going to ODU, were you going to high school in the States and then went to Norfolk for your undergraduate degree, or did you go all the way across the world to start in the U.S. at undergrad?
That was not to be, but that's a perfect, like, that whole American dream story. So my parents sent me to the US with $250 in my pocket, a couple of tennis rackets, some equipment and all of that. So that was the starting point. No, I went to high school back in Kyrgyzstan. When I first came here, my English was not the best. Let's put it that way. At the time, I could communicate,
Yeah.
the basic level, but it was quite a learning curve. Let's put it that way. But I learned, and I took a lot of English classes actually at the time, so that helped a lot. Yeah.
How do you balance that as a financial planner, advisor, quasi therapist in a lot of circumstances? I imagine unregistered, but you know what I mean. But how do you balance having conversations with high net worth individuals about their retirement plans, what their issues and concerns and problems are, and to your point, there maybe lack of satisfaction. They might be 65 years old with 7-8 figure net worths, but they're still not happy at that age. How do you think about how do you rest easy at night when you close your computer and go home to your family? What's your psyche like around that? Again, to your point of not necessarily in it to go and build this $1 billion practice per se, but also wanting to be able to take care of yourself and your family through your years. How do you balance that when you're talking to folks and meeting with folks that they're probably folks that are a lot maybe not as wealthy as the 7 or 8 figure individual, but they're a lot happier? What is that like for you as a person that kind of sees the full landscape of it?
Well, again, having that conversation usually helps. You see, it's challenging to have it up until you have a certain level of relationship with your clients. I mean, I will say that. That's why, again, in terms of the work I do, and I will say this, there are other great advisors in our area, in the DMV area, that do, they have their own specialties, but it's a similar approach in the sense they're focusing not on the transaction, not on the fact that they're delivering, financial plan or investment strategy to their clients, but on the overall relationship. Because eventually, again, your clients, they will tell you what's important to them. They may not open up on day one or in your second or third meeting, but eventually they'll tell you, what, the reason I'm really concerned is because my mother, as an example, is the child of the Great Depression. And I grew up in a family where we used to save, and that's just my mentality. In some cases, by the way, I know I'm kind of picking on this example, you're not going to change someone's mind. The only thing you can really do, you can acknowledge the fact and move forward. Because some people, again, they just thrifty to begin with. And you mentioned the therapist idea. I certainly find myself in that role every so often, but I'm certainly not in a position to change someone's opinion.
Right.
My job is to, of course, design a plan for them. I want to explain, I want to make sure they're comfortable. And again, acknowledge their preferences. Sometimes this is a very powerful thing, to do, instead of kind of like telling them, okay, this is my perspective, this is what you should be doing. So
Mm-hmm. One of the other interesting things that you mentioned, and I keep harping on it, but it really caught my attention, is around, encouraging your clients to maybe spend more than some other financial advisor might. And obviously, caveats, asterisks, not a financial advice, what have you. But I'd be curious what your perspectives are on the current state of play in the broader continuum of personal finance, because I feel as though, the boomer generation was very much save, save, save. Parents were depression families.
yeah,
Same thing with, the generation below them. I can't remember which letter that is, but that generation, same thing, where it's, the very much American dream in the machine. Go to school, get a degree, go work through your pension, or if you even have pension, until you retire. Now I feel like the winds are shifting a little bit. I think probably, again, back to the point on social media, you have all of these influencers out there. You have these content creators that are saying, hey, I can go and make $100,000 a year posting sourdough bread tutorials on YouTube, and I'm perfectly happy. And I, have to figure out health insurance, I have to do whatever else. Or you have this other side of it, where saying, hey, I'm making $85,000 a year as a, whatever career you want, professional services career. And I'm going to go spend a lot more of it than my parents want me to, or would advise me to, because life is too short. I lost out on my,
yeah,
time during the pandemic in my 20s. So I see both sides of it. I hear a lot about that now of, hey, like you can always figure out a way to make money. Retirement's not guaranteed. So I'm curious, as you're thinking about the next wave of Capital Squared clients down the road, what's that like for you, as, thinking about the future of this business thematically, as you're going to have a new generation of clients that are very much in the mindset of, you only live once, you don't know what's around the
yeah.
corner, I want to go spend it all. And maybe that's just not the right client base for you guys, but maybe just in general, how do you, see the winds shifting from generation to generation of, the saving to the instant gratification generation?
It's interesting you say that. I was going to make two comments, but I guess I will make three comments. It still, it depends. I mean, that's the answer. There's this one group of people that you're referring to. I know exactly what you mean. You only live once, and let's just spend it all, and that's the end of it. There's something to be said about that, but of course, now here as a financial planner, I must say, I mean, there's something to be said about the time that you have. And
Mm-hmm.
if frankly you're just wasting your time, then sure, you can catch up in the future, perhaps in your 40s, 50s, or even 60s. It's just going to be much more challenging for you to do so. And every so often, when I do work with people like that, that is what I would say. Again, I would acknowledge that they can accomplish their goals by doing what they're doing. It's just going to be much more challenging for them to do so. That's all there is. That's my job. And then if they decide to continue doing what they're doing, that's fine. Now, the second point I'll say, without making any direct comments in social media and all of that, because you have to be really careful. Today's investors, let's say, millennials and such, they're much smarter, in my opinion, perhaps than certain other generations, because they ask very good questions. They come to meetings prepared, which is something I always appreciate. In some sense, not sure if using the word grill is the best here, but they're asking you very good questions. They're not really into, okay, touchy feely, someone just connected me with you and I'm just going to work with you before because of that. They dig deeper. So I've been noticing that. And the third comment I'm going to make, which is perhaps more practical in nature, I'm all about paying yourself first. Not providing any financial advice here, but that's just overall how I approach this. So the idea is you save what you need to save and you spend the rest. I love it. I'm very much on tight budget from that perspective. I'm again one of those financial planners. I usually don't start with that. What is, how much you're trying to spend. So in terms of developing a financial plan specifically for people perhaps in their 30s, 40s, sometimes in their 50s, just save as much as you need to save and spend the rest and be free, because again, life is short and you want to enjoy yourself.
Yeah, no, I think it's great advice. And I feel like for my first year or so out of school, as I was starting to understand personal finance better. I studied finance in school, but I learned a ton about high finance and investments in derivatives and, how to deal with a discounted cash flow model, but not about, hey, what do you do when you get your first paycheck? How do you split that up? And so
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting my first year of school, really trying to understand, hey, here's what I actually am making. Here's what comes into my bank account. Here's where to go from here. Settling in, putting the automation in place for paying credit cards or paying bills, what have you. All of that. I still was scratching my head for a few years about, hey, what's the target number I need to be working towards? There's no, basically I was looking for a place to say, hey, when I come out of school, here's the framework that you go and look at when you get your first, big boy or big girl job. Here's the place that you go to figure out how much do you save, how much do you spend, how much do you invest, 401k, credit card, whatever like that. Question one is, do you know of a tool or service like that? Because I think that there's just I didn't find a market that was made for that. There's Nerd Wallet, but that didn't really get the job done. And then two, what do you think is like the first, not a silver bullet per se, but like the first step in the personal finance journey? Where should people start in trying to figure this out, whether they're 22 or 42? Where's the best place to just get started to get their journey going?
Yeah, so you see, this is back to our earlier conversation in terms of perhaps some generational differences. So I do strongly believe that, again, younger investors today, they have such a big advantage when compared to the opportunities that those, I guess, older investors had 20, 30 years ago. One of the webinars I used to have, I no longer do it, but it was for younger professionals. And the whole point was how easy it is to become a millionaire. It's incredibly easy to become a millionaire. All you have to do, don't quote me on that, it's been a while since I put together that webinar. You need to start saving $25 a month in your early 20s. And each year, you just need to increase it by 3% and invest in the stock market. If I'm not mistaken, in 27 years or so, you'll become a millionaire. So that's all there is to the answer to your second question in terms of where should you start. Start by saving $25 a month and increase that figure by 3% each year. Again, you need to check my math on that a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of what tools you have, actually, there are a lot of great tools. If you have a 401k provider, which I would like to say that many people have access to, they usually have those calculators. The most challenging part is to really figure out your lifestyle. Truth be told, and I gave it a lot of thought, it's hard for me to imagine how a 20 or 30-year-old can truly figure out what his or her lifestyle should look like in their 60s, as an example.
Yeah.
So in some sense, you have to work with, that research I mentioned, 10 to 20% of your gross income. Sure, later you can always run those projections, a little more technical. So there is that. But in terms of the percentages, that's perhaps my favorite way of addressing that question. 10 to 20% of your gross income should put you on track. And then, of course, later on, once you start realizing what is it that you want, what lifestyle you're trying to have, you can adjust that number to make it lower or higher.
Great advice. And if you ever started a platform that was, hey, you just graduated from college and you need to know what to do with your first paycheck, come to, C Squared and we'll make it happen. I think that could be our Shark Tank idea together. I think there's a market to be made there. But in tying this back, we're talking about, your goals and or an individual's goals and lifestyle as, 2030 is very different than 60. For you, present day, you're running a business as a founder. You are staying active on social media. You're still playing tennis from the sounds of it. How do you balance your, day to day to stay mentally, physically sane and sharp, and then also running your business and also being a spouse as well?
Well, this is a $1 million question, right? So that's what we discussed in different podcasts. I believe one of the ingredients of being successful, and again, it sounds so self-serving when I put it that way, is to be organized. That's what I feel like many people are lacking in my position who, they launch their firms, financial firms or some other firm, but there's no structure in place. So then eventually they get overwhelmed. The reason they get overwhelmed is not so much because there's 100 tasks to manage that's in their head, is because they have no system to manage those tasks. So to give you a direct answer to your question, I'm incredibly well organized. I have a CRM, customer relationship management software. I'm not gonna give them a free promotion here, but it runs my professional life. Every single thing I do is in my CRM. So that's what I religiously do in the morning before I start my day, and that's how I usually finish my day. Occasionally, when I get busy, I would switch to check in the next day. So that helps. In terms of staying active, it's a must because again, that's how you get overwhelmed. For me, it's tennis. It can be any other activity. Presumably, would be some kind of activity. So, going for drinks with your friends is not likely to do that, in my opinion. It needs to be more active.
Yeah.
So that's that. And of course, the classic answer to your question is delegating, delegating, and delegating. That's another reason why people get overwhelmed because they want to handle it all themselves instead of delegating, and then they start micromanaging. That's even worse. So, yeah.
Last question for you as we round out.
Absolutely.
If you could manage anyone as a client, anyone famous, not famous, celebrity in history, alive, not, is it, Roger Federer, to keep with the tennis theme? Who would be your, dream client? Obviously there's caveats and all the necessary things that need to go into it, but just for the sake of a fun question, who would you pick?
I love it. Love it. And it's actually a great, simple question for me, Andre Agassi. So I would love for Andre Agassi, if he is listening to your podcast, Andre, please reach out to me. I would love to become your financial planner. The reason I bring that up, so my tennis game is built after his game. That's entirely different conversation, but I essentially modeled his game style, that quick hitting the ball in the right. So I would absolutely love if he ever reaches out to me and asks for some financial advice.
All right, Andre. Hopefully you're listening to this. We'll make a free plug. But Alex, I'll be sure to plug everything about you in my show notes here. I'm so appreciative of your time. I'm glad we finally were able to connect, and hopefully we can get together in person here sometime soon.
I would love that. Again, this is great. Thanks so much for organizing this. I appreciate it.